Now I say that I muted it, and I'm going to look back.
I can't imagine having that done to my eyes. I mean,
Right.
Yes.
I have to move faster.
Yeah. Right. Well, I guess, relax.
It's right here. Yeah, I can hit them in a minute.
We
tried it before. The only thing is this whole section gets started. So hopefully it's not too bad, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, the medicine that the only medicine, I looked up, the only medicine that actually helps cataracts is given it an injection in your arm.
What does it do?
I don't know, but they only give it to you after you had the surgery. It's like, well,
It's tight on space. I'm looking for a suit.
surgery. Do it next time.
We got limited space today, sorry.
The captain's chair is still available.
Premium seating is available. There is a nominal fee.
Take a shot. Feel good.
Well, I go to the VA, so you don't get that until you're really old or
Yeah, I don't like.
I went in there. I went in there actually.
That was the problem.
Yeah, I had some
Right. That's why I stopped.
give me something now. You don't have it. My wife goes in there. And they give her shots, they give her anything. Actually going on heroin, whatever you need. We'll make the pain go away. I go in there and take some action.
If my business partners will leave.
Yeah.
Yes, that's how mine is doing.
And the odd thing is, I don't have to
But it's only when it
well, worst thing I've ever tried. I mean, worst problem I've ever had. Nothing I've ever tried. But they all nothing else.
Yeah, mine had a manual setting.
Oh, maybe.
And it was 900 days. I think the other I think it's just
Once it's like down to basically then you're down.
Pretty much like trying to model it.
How long should I let it sit in the bottle?
I just drink it.
We're gonna open up early because everybody does. Like 3 days in.
My friend was there.
I still do that, you know. But wait, usually at least 2 weeks. It's not for about 2 weeks.
Yeah, thanks guys. I appreciate the help. This is like such a confusing.
Well, it's a million different steps and like so many things. I'm like, panic, no! So.
Yeah, I'm starting to get a handle on it though. I take some really studious notes and like
Perfect.
I was thinking this morning about different beta things I could do once I have like a couple dozen batches about plotting the.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff, and like people get crazy with it too. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's not good. I mean, it's okay. It's just okay. yeah,
On here?
Yeah. Pull the deck up. But it's only one slide.
Oh, on this one. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm like. Oh, I thought you wanted me to put it on mine on here. I was like, yes, I can do this for you. Okay. This one? Always updates. Critical, critical.
That's what I would not want to tear off. Oops. So I want to tear out the section of these in my office.
How do we go down?
Is this readable or like really hard to read? I can turn off the lights, but these baby has.
Try it. Let's see what it looks like.
Yeah, let's see what it
Try
looks
to turn the lights on.
Just to turn it off?
Well, just to see what it's going to last. If you're, is that too dark or no?
Good. I like it.
Off? Yeah.
Remember developers, they never like to do that.
Everybody skitters like cockroaches.
It's not, how to make it go down manually?
Sorry?
Go down manually.
Go down? Like what?
Go down to the next page, so go to the next one.
Is it doing it?
No, it seems to be doing it automatically.
Oh.
To go manually.
Let's see. We'll take the timers off. Here we go. And, let me see. I've got this one running, so I don't know if that's gonna mess with it. Sure. This one?
Hey, Mike, you got the old login on there.
I saw. Yeah, we updated it. It's fine. Let me.
Now we need camps.
Fantastic.
Just was angry about it before. Sorry, this one? This one? You got it.
I just wanted to mention this column.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then competition.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to do that up front, or you want to do that at the end?
Well, I'm sure that's not legal. So it might be like
Just roll the notes, and then I'll give you that. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you for coming out in the cold and snow for today's meeting on reactive extensions. Just before we start that, just a couple of announcements. The Wi-Fi, if anyone wants it, is the SSID is TechNexus, and the password is collaborate, all lowercase, but with the E replaced with a 3. Okay, and
The restrooms, if anybody needs to use them, right back into the hallway and on your right. The password is 1 and then 2222222, something like that.
12222.
12222, you got it.
I honestly don't know the women's room number. So if you need it, we might have to go get it for you.
Yes, that's a good one.
We're not supposed to know it. That's the whole idea. So.
He only knows because he's asking.
I keep asking.
Yeah, we're normally on the other side, for those of you that haven't been to this, to one of our meetups at this location before, but they have an event at the other side tonight that they booked after us, but I think they're getting paid for. So
There's people.
There's a lot more money
so we got
involved
booted
there.
out to this place. But it's okay because it's cold. There's not that many people signed up, so it's okay. Exactly. I think you might be gate crashing after this, you know.
I asked them, I didn't even laugh. Stop talking, get out of here.
So, just wanted to mention a couple of things. There are two conferences coming up in Chicago, one in April and one in May, that a couple of the organizers of this group are actually involved in. On April the 18th, there's Chicago CodeCamp, and the website is chicagocodecamp.com. And Lewin, who's one of our organizers, is the co-organizer for that. I know they're still looking for papers. They've got most of them, but I think they're still looking for a couple of papers, and they are always interested in sponsorship. So if any of you guys work for companies that might want to have visibility there, contact me. Go to the website. There's a page for sponsorships and papers and things like that. Paper submissions. So, Chicago Code Camp. Okay. That's on April the 18th, and it's being held at ITT. It's basically both of these conferences are basically conferences for developers, organised by developers, presentations by developers. So it really is a development-oriented. Both of them are development-oriented conferences. It's no sales crap, no marketing. It's real developers-centric stuff. And the second one is on May the 14th and 15th. It's 1.5 days. I believe the 14th is the half day.
14th is the half day. So,
Jason is one of the organisers, so if you want to talk a bit about it, Jason.
So basically, I should have read this. All of our papers is over. Can't submit anymore, but we are looking for sponsorship. We'll back. We'll have James Lunt and Magno speak, Xamarin training, as well as 3 other presenters and the 10 music content.
Okay. And there's a number of tracks. So there's with this one there's a Java track, there's a .NET track, big data.
There's Java, there's Java, .NET, cloud, and mobile.
Big data as well. So there's a number of tracks that you can choose for the tech. So again, apparently the paper submissions is over, but again, if your company is interested in sponsoring that, please Jason, or go to the website and you can find out about that on there. And just one other thing. So Google this is very late by the way, because we only just found out about it. Google actually have a competition at the moment called the Google Cloud Platform Build-Off. If you've got an app out there, it's probably too late to build an app for it, but if you've got an app that uses that platform, if you submit it to this by February the 28th, then you get entered into it, and the first place is $100,000 of platform credit, $5,000 in cash, and you get to showcase your app at South by Southwest. Second place is 20 grand in credit and 3,000 in cash, and the third place is 10,000 in credit. So just want to let everyone know in case anyone's interested.
Don't go to sleep for the next 2 days. Got a little bit of time.
And with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Mike Stonis of Eightbot to present today. Now, Eightbot are not only sponsoring it, not only presenting, but they're sponsoring the event. They provided the location and so thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
I want to say a little bit about Eightbot first.
Sure, yeah. All right, so thanks everybody for making it out here once again. The weather is a little brutal. My name, I'll talk about it inside here. What we're here for today, if you don't know why you're here, I guess might have a problem.
Before you start, Mike, anybody need a beer? I'm running over there.
And I was going to mention
This is more important than
I agree.
anything Mike's going to say.
I completely
Got a
agree.
can, okay. If there's any left, I'll grab it.
If anybody wants, if you're hungry along the way, or if you want more beer, you could walk right by. I won't be offended. If you just want to get up and leave midway through or fall asleep or whatever too, that's fine.
Just no snoring.
Just a snore, yeah, I got enough of that far away.
So, topic for today is Reactive Extensions and Reactive UI. Just to throw this out really quick before we get started in there, these are two very in-depth topics that go very deep, that have many features that we will not be able to go over today. got like an hour to get through stuff. So it's not going to be a comprehensive comprehensive deep dive today, but really just an overview to give you an idea of what they are, how they're used, and how you can use them in your applications. Right? My name, look kind of weird up there. Kind of weird over here too, though. Weird up there. My name is Mike Stonis. I'm a partner here at Eightbot. I am primarily nowadays a Xamarin developer, Xamarin MVP, certified professional, Xamarin, whatever you want to call me, type guy. Do lots of mobile development. That's what our company Eightbot is. We've got a couple of our people over here. Focus on .NET mobile development. So if anybody here is looking for .NET mobile development, if anybody here wants to get into writing apps for .NET mobile, just come talk to one of us. We've always got some kind of work going on or something like that. We're always glad to help out. So just come talk to one of the guys over there or me. I'm glad to help you out. That'd be interesting. So enough about that. All right. What we want to talk about, though, is reactive stuff. So does anybody remember the first time they heard about Link? Right? It's kind of like super crazy, weird .NET stuff. Is anybody here not familiar with Link, by the way? Raise your hand, don't be shy. I figure probably most everybody, if you're coming to this one, probably knew about it. If you don't know about that Link, you might know about this Link. This is J-Pop, Superstars, Link. It's actually spelled the same way. I don't know anything about this, so I hope they're not like a terrible group. That's why I'm doing an image search. But, you know, a lot of what we're going to talk about today relates back to Link. It's actually going to use Link and stuff like that. But, you know, when I first started using these reactive extensions, I had the same experience that I had the first time I started using Link. It's one of those things that I know a lot of people are very apprehensive about, or people have come across a few times and said, you know, it's too complicated or it's too weird. Remember the first time I saw a Link statement and I was like, what is going on here? None of this makes sense. Like I said before, today's meetup is going to be more of an overview. And what I hope to do is just kind of give you enough information so that you are familiar enough with reactive extensions, reactive UI, to drill in further. It's too complex of a topic to, like I said, cover everything today. But what I want you to do is feel good about it so that you don't have that feeling that you might have had the first time you saw Link. Sorry for the bad Zelda and J-pop stuff. Right? So I was saying, the first time I saw Link, I saw something like this, and I was like, what is even going on here? You know, like the from, where, select didn't make any sense. But the more you use it, you know, whether you use this style or if you use the more fluent style of doing Link, you know, after a while it kind of picks up and it grows on you and becomes familiar. So like I said, that's what we kind of want to cover here today and talk about today. All right, so we're going to have two parts here. The first thing I want to talk about in particular are the reactive extensions. You might be wondering, what are the reactive extensions? Right, the reactive extensions are essentially a library or a set of libraries that are out there to make our development lives a lot easier for asynchronous processing or event-based applications. What they're out there to do is make it so that as we develop our applications, they're easier to understand, more reliable because we can do a lot of neat things with error catching and stuff like that, and just sort of overall better architected, I would say, in a lot of ways. Right. Key benefits of using the reactive extensions, as I mentioned, we haven't looked at anything yet, but they're nice and easy to understand. Now, I mentioned, you know, a lot of people here, I'm sure, probably maybe looked at the reactive extensions and said, what is going on there? So I'll try to dispel some of that and show kind of how it works underneath the sheets here a little bit. But the idea is it wants to make asynchronous processing, or that event-based processing, easier on a developer to digest. A couple other benefits of the reactive extensions is that they have a lot of extensions out there for timing. So if you want to buffer input, if you want to delay input on something, and we'll look at some examples here, or if you want to just only observe things on a fixed interval, it's got a lot of built-in support for that as well. Additionally, there's a lot of really nice support in there for testing. As you may know, or you know, if you're a UI developer, you know that one of the hardest things to do is to develop your UIs and make them testable. The reactive extensions have a lot of things in there, like the ability to repeat a series of events, or to inspect what had happened over the course of an event stream. So it's really nice and helpful for testing out there. And then finally, lots of good support for error handling and cancellation. So if something does go bad, it's not as if it will just completely blow out of your application. We can put in little bits of logic in our apps to handle when an error occurs, or if we want to do something like cancel out the flow of some code there. Okay. Language support. So the reactive extensions that we'll be talking about tonight in particular are all .NET focused, but there are a lot of languages that support it. You know, if you're a JavaScript developer or C++, Python, Ruby, there are reactive frameworks or reactive extensions for those languages as well. So a lot of the stuff that we talk about tonight is, you know, the concepts that we cover here will cover over, being brought over to those languages as well. Okay, so got these reactive extensions. They sound cool, Mike. Why would I ever use these, or when do I want to use these? The reactive extensions are really helpful when you want to build your user interface. You have something like mouse movements that you want to track in your application, button clicks that you want to track in your application. If you have windows in your application, you want to know when the user resizes a window or resizes a control. These reactive extensions are super helpful in those events because we can get that stream of changes or those stream of events and respond to them appropriately. Also, if you have a user interface that has changes, properties that change or that you need to be notified of, reactive extensions are really nice for that as well. So if you're doing MVVM development or if you're building a user interface, you're always going to have some kind of property change you want to listen to, right? Did somebody click on this button? Did somebody change a value in a label or a text box? Did somebody choose something from a combo box? Stuff like that. Reactive extensions are really nice and helpful to detect when those things occur and to respond to them appropriately. And then finally, if you need to consume something like a stream of data, right? If you have a file watcher, something that's just sitting out there looking at the file system, instead of constantly polling, what we could do are use these reactive extensions to notify us when something changes. Okay, so or if we have a stream of data coming from you know, system.io, you know, if we're reading the data from something like that, we can use reactive extensions there. So anytime we've got events or data that's flowing into us, the reactive extensions are a pretty helpful library to get up and running. Okay. Right? Kind of think of it like this, right? We've got sort of our highway example here. We've got data flowing all over the place. We think of the reactive extensions, it just gives us one way to have it all flow down. So as we'll see in a few of our examples here, we have button clicks, things like that, data kind of running all around our application. The reactive extensions just give us sort of a nice unified way to subscribe to those different data changes and to consume that data in a way that doesn't feel like spaghetti code, you know, written everywhere. So I'm sure everybody here has written plenty of event handlers where it's plus equals something, go run this method, and then you forget to unsubscribe to it, and you know, you have unexpected behavior later. We'll kind of talk about all that and why these extensions help us out there. All right, a couple of core concepts that I want to cover before we look at code, though. The first one is this idea of observables. In reactive extensions, one of the core pieces here that we have are our observables. Observables are essentially just a data stream, right? It's an asynchronous data stream that's notifying us when it has an update. You know, think of it, if you have something like a mobile application that has GPS updates, you want to be notified when there's a GPS update. If you have a user interface when and somebody clicks on a button, you want to be notified when somebody clicks on that button. If you're building a game and you want to get, maybe a game is not a good example, but if you're building an application, you want to get a stream of input from the user, reactive extensions can be used to give you whichever key command they typed on the keyboard, right? Nice, easy way to subscribe to that data. And the observables are our key point. It's our data push, right? So the way you kind of want to think about it is like this. Traditionally, when we want to get data in our applications, maybe not traditionally, but what we're probably most common with when we want to get data in our applications is using something like IEnumerable. Right? We go to a database, we get a list back, or we get some sort of IEnumerable back, and then we comb through it. We request that data. We say, you know, .select or, you know, for each, and we go through all that data. We manually have to go and retrieve it. We pull that data. The big difference here with the observables or with reactive is that, in this case, the data is pushed to us. Instead of us saying, hey, when are there updates, when are there updates, or checking, inspecting to see when there's updates, we are told. The observable is going to tell us when there are updates in our application. All right. Then the other key piece here are our observers. Our observers are out there to listen to when there are updates. So we need somebody to actually consume when an update has occurred. The observers basically have three key methods or key properties that we're going to use here. We've got our next value. So whenever we get a value pushed out of that observable, that's our next value there. Okay, that's a piece that just says, hey, there's an update, hey, there's an update, hey, there's an update. That's all coming from next value there. We can be notified when something is completed. So if we have a stream of data coming in, if that data block is finished and we've done all of our downloading or something like that, we can be notified when that stream is completed running. And then we also have errors, right? So if something errors out, we can say, oh, do we handle this gracefully? Do we maybe inject a value just to keep the stream running or something like that? Or do we blow all the way out? So our observers are listening to our observables. It's kind of two very similar words, and I know it's kind of confusing, but your observables push data, our observers consume that data. And then we also have link. So link comes back into play here in the reactive extensions. As we're being notified of data updates and things like that, we can use link with the reactive extensions to know when those updates occur. We could use that link query language to say, oh, hey, this update came through maybe for a username. We only want usernames that are more than 4 characters in length or something like that. So we could use link to do filtering. We could do it for use it for ordering. We get a series of updates pushed to us. We could say, we want these ordered by last name or first name. We could use link in combination with reactive extensions to get the data the way we'd like it. And I'll show an example of this here in just a moment. All right. In fact, let's jump in and let me stop talking about these extensions. Let's actually take a look at some demos here. Okay, so I've got a series of demos. All these are out on GitHub. I'll have the link out here later in the presentation if anybody wants to get these. But the extensions or the demos that I have here today are all running. This is on a Mac here in Xamarin Studio. These are all running with Xamarin Forms. So if you want to use this in Forms applications, I'll talk about the Reactive UI stuff in a little bit. But if anybody's interested, it's all running in Forms here. The first thing I wanted to look at here is just a quick demo of an application that uses Reactive UI to provide some timer-based functionality. Okay, so let me just switch over here to my example, and let's see how it's going to go all the way right to here. And let me kind of stretch this out here so we've got something that's a little bit more readable. Okay. All right, so in order to use the reactive extensions, first thing we need to do, actually, sorry, let me just take one step back, is we need to go grab some packages. Okay, so you can see out here, I've got these set of NuGet packages that I added into my project. This is a Microsoft-supported project, so all you need to do is include these from NuGet, and you'll get all the reactive functionality out here. So let me just jump out here. I could show you. Search for reactive. Click search. Let it really search. Let it really search. Here we go. You can see we've got these set of reactive extensions. They just use the black logo out there. I don't know if that is a salamander or something like that. We just want to include these different reactive extensions into your applications. This will bring all that functionality into your application. This is running on a portable class library too. So this is something that you could bring in all the way back to .NET 4, I believe. Hopefully I'm not wrong about that. But you can also use it in portable class libraries. So if you want to use it in your mobile applications, you're more than welcome to do that. It's not just limited to desktop or server.NET. Let me just close this here. Okay, so with our reactive extensions here, one of our key items, like I said, is going to be our observable. So if we want to create a new observable in our application, we're going to start with this keyword over here of observable. In this example, what I want to do is I want to set up an observable that notifies me every 1.5 seconds. So what I'm doing here is I just create a new observable, and I'm going to give it an interval, and in this case I'm going to give it a time span. And what I'm telling it is, this observable that I have right here, I want to have information pumped to me every 1.5 seconds. Now, there's really no backing data store on here or something. I'm not taking data off the internet. I'm not actually getting data from anywhere. All this essentially is just sort of a simple timer to pump data out to me, right? So I just say, every 1.5 seconds, notify me that something is elapsed. It's kind of just like setting up a regular timer in .NET. We've got some other methods that we use out here. They kind of use this fluid method style for setting up our observables. We've got this method here, which is our observe on method. Observe on is going to tell us when something happens, where do I want that thing to be observed upon. So it sounds kind of funny. Didn't really explain anything there, but what it's saying is where do you want this notification to be run on. So in cases if you're building a user interface application, in this example, I'm telling it that I want to run on the main thread scheduler. So I say that when this notification runs and when I listen to this notification, I want to respond to it on the user interface thread. So what's cool about this is that I know that at this point in time, I'm telling it that anytime it pumps up this notification and I respond to that notification, I'm going to do it on my user interface thread. It's a guarantee in this example that whatever I'm going to do to respond to it will run on the user interface thread. So I don't need to do calls in here. You know, if you're building a user interface application, I don't have to do something like, you know, begin invoke on main thread if we're on iOS, or, you know, what is it, run on main or whatever it is, run on UI in Android. I can be guaranteed that I can run on the user interface thread. You can also observe off the user interface thread. So if you want to keep your user interface running and you're doing something just like logging, you can observe on, you know, a thread from the thread pool. It doesn't matter if you just want to dump that data out somewhere. But in a lot of our examples here today, I will be observing on the user interface thread just because we'll be updating our user interface. I also have a quick little helper library out here called dump. It doesn't have a great name. It's a great little library. I'll just show it to you here really fast. Find it. Oh, here it is. All that I did with this, just a quick helper method from Microsoft, and just used for our demo here today. But this will just tell us, in this example, whenever we get an update, so it's going to subscribe. There we go. No, anybody want to play Hearthstone later? It's not playable. Anyway, all this is going to do, just for your example, I'll explain this more in just a minute here, but all it's going to do is just allow us to see in the output there, whenever we get notified of an update, if there's any exceptions that occurred, and when our stream completes, we could be notified of that as well. So just a quick helper here for today's demos. Let me switch back. All right, and finally here then we have our subscription. Right, so we have our observable up there on the top, and this last line here is going to create our observer. So by saying subscribe, what we're telling this is that when you have that update, when we pump out that update every 1.5 seconds, what we want to do is subscribe to the data that's being kicked out of there. All right, in this case, we're going to get this interval that basically is just going to increment every time. We're going to get a time interval that every time this event fires off, or every time this notification fires off, it's just going to be incremented by 1. Okay? We'll see it on the user interface. But these are two key pieces, right? This first piece up here is setting up our observable, saying this is when I want it to run every 1.5 seconds. I want this to be observed on the user interface thread, and that dump just is going to do some logging out here. And then our observer here is our subscribe, right? So our subscribe is saying, give that data to me. You can see it's going to take in, we're going to have a lambda here. And all I'm saying this lambda is, give me my time interval, which is going to be, let's see if I can get this up here with IntelliSense. It's going to be taking in a long value into here. The long value is going to be what's been returned out here from my observable. So I'll actually just rewrite this here really quick. Say var timer observable. Oops. This one. There we go. It should be good. Am I missing here? Anything? Good, no? Oh, yes. You need to actually subscribe to something, right, Mike? Never live code. So these are our two pieces here, right? So we have our first piece up here, which is our observable. If I look at my observable here that I created, you'll see my timer observable is just an I observable of long, which means that it's going to return out long values, that int64 value out of there. Anytime this observable fires up, it's going to notify me with that long value. Down here, then, what I'm doing is I'm taking that observable and subscribing to it. So I'm creating that subscription to that notification. And we're going to get in, right, when we create that subscription, we're going to subscribe to that long value coming in. And then all I'm going to do here for this example is I'm just going to create or I'm just going to update a label in my user interface and just update that text in the user interface. Okay, so let me just run this here really fast. No, it's good, just the user interface wasn't updated. Quit assigning me tasks. Mr. Nuzzo. Let's see here, let me get this up and running. Go, simulator, go. Maybe. Just thinking about it. It's really thinking about it. Try that one again. Try. Just commit out of there. Give it another shot here. Think you lost the connection?
Yeah, I
Sure. Does anybody know any bad jokes while I restart here? If you know any good jokes, feel free to tell those. But personally, I appreciate the bad ones better. Let's see. Oh, there we go. 1 second. Now's a good time. If anybody wants to grab beer, too. Just a moment. All right. Yep. It's looking better. Oh no. Just like that. Sometimes the simulator gets a little nervous. The simulator swears this never happens. It's never happened to it before. Let's another shot. I guess my bad jokes. This guy got it. I could probably put it on an iPhone, but it would be hard to see. You've got a 6 Plus. I guess it's probably about the size of that screen up there. So, how about the 6 Plus if we need to? Give it another shot here. Sorry about this. Oh no. I'm gonna do this. Switch to different hardware. There you go. Try this. All let's give this a shot. Fingers crossed. Come on, simulator, don't let me down. Woohoo! Oh!
Switch to the 6 again.
Oh, it did. No joke. Look at that. Switch to that 5S. Got the 5S. Yes! All right, I'm done. See you guys later. I'm out of here. That's it. Get the drop. Now we got that to actually run. Maybe I saw it ready to. Here we go. Here we go. No! No! We'll give it another shot. Oh, come on. I wonder if it's Hangouts. Hangouts sometimes messes with this machine. Had demo issues with Hangouts on before. Hope it's not the case.
On the build options, on the, have you got it split over again?
Shouldn't link anything. It just gets
Oh,
kind of
okay.
All right, here we go. All right, so our application here, we had that observable that we set up. I've just got a real simple UI here. When I click that start button, what it's going to do is it's going to create that observable and then subscribe to it. So there we go, right? See, we've got our simple observable out here, and every 1.5 seconds, it's just notifying out that something happened. In my subscribe, then I'm just listening out there for when that notification occurs, right? It's a simple interval. We go back to code, talk about what we got going on here. Right, our simple observable here, we created it and we said every 1.5 seconds pump out a notification. Let me know that that notification occurred. Then we set up a subscription to that notification here in our timer subscription. And we said, hey, every time that happens, what we want to do is subscribe to that. And inside that Lambda, we said we're going to update this label, the text of this label on our user interface. Okay, down here in our application output, then you can see every time we get one of those notifications pushed, I'm just logging that out in that window. Okay, so every time we get that pushed out there, I'm logging. One of the things I want to point out here too, that you may notice from some of the code up above, is that these subscriptions are iDisposable. So anytime we get a subscription, or every time we create a subscription, it is going to be iDisposable, which is really nice, especially when we're creating a user interface application or something like that, because now if we ever want to get rid of the subscription, all we need to do is just call dispose on that disposable, and we'll remove the subscription. Okay? I'll show why that just in a minute here, why that's pretty neat for our user interface code. And so if I want to stop it, all I'm going to do here is click on stop. And what stop is going to do is that's going to call out to my disposable and actually stop it out there. What you should notice, though, what I want to point out, though, is that it just stopped my subscription. Okay, that observable is still running and firing off in the background. I didn't stop that from pumping out that data. Okay, that's up, that's running, that's pumping out data. All I did is just stop my subscription. So my user interface isn't updated. So if I have somebody else who comes in later in the application that wants to subscribe to that notification, they can easily pick that up and start running with it. But in terms of my UI, I've removed that update out there. All right, so just a simple example here to get us started. But let's work on this and let's make it a little better. One of the biggest problems that we have, in particular with mobile development, but this is a .NET problem all the way around, is unsubscribed from events, right? Everybody here, if you've made a mobile application, you probably run into memory issues from unsubscribed events. If you haven't, make sure that you look, because there's probably some memory issues from unsubscribed events. And a lot of us take these for granted, setting up something like a click handler here to grab when that button is clicked and never unsubscribing to it on a desktop application, for example, because we've got tons and tons of memory, just really something that you don't consider. But what's neat, though, is we could use our observables or the reactive extensions in tandem with events so that we can have that same kind of subscribe and unsubscribe functionality out there to remove our subscription to events. So let me just show you our next example here. right, which will look a lot like our last one. But in this case, right, if I want to, I can also subscribe to events using this observable.fromEventPattern. So you can still see it's got that plus equals and minus equals in there for setting up our subscription and removing it. And essentially what this will do is just create another observable for us. Right? It's an I observable here that we could then subscribe to and unsubscribe to. So we've got it there. And with that subscription, or excuse me, I don't think I have it. Might not have coded that in here. I apologize. But with that observable, we can now subscribe to anytime we have a button click handler and be notified whenever that button gets clicked, right? So I don't need to come in there and do my typical event subscription where I'd say, you know, start.clicked plus equals my method to handle that. I can now turn that into an observable so that each and every time that start button gets clicked, we could be notified of it out on our user interface. And so, you know, this is essentially the same example that we saw in the last case there, but now when now what I'm going to do is instead of handling the event in my method there, or my onClick method, it's now an observable. So I can tell this when this method, excuse me, or when this notification gets fired off, observe to it. Yep, feel free to come on. You've got space around. So I'm going to observe it on it on my user interface thread. I'm trying to see if there's seats. I think there's some. Oh yeah, we've got premium seating up front here. You got your ticket. This is for the fan zone only. Season ticket holders. I'm going to set up my event subscription out here with an observe on as well for that start click, so I know that anything that fires off in there can be observed on my user interface thread. That's also sometimes a problem with event handling in .NET. That event may be fired off or may be handled on a background thread, so you might not want to have that happen if you're updating the user interface on a button click or something like that that gets fired off from the background thread. Handled. From the background thread, we kind of have a nicer way to subscribe to that user. All right, so just a quick example of how we can also subscribe to those events as well. I won't run this example just because it's the same essentially as our last one. All right, so just some simple setup here. But let's look at something a little bit more interesting. All right, the next thing that we could do with these extensions here is in this case what I'm going to say is that whenever my text entry changes, so I've got a user interface with a text entry bar at the top of the screen. I'm going to say whenever that text changes, wait 2.5 seconds after it changes, and then, or wait 2.5 seconds after those changes, the last changes occurred, and notify me of it. Okay, so if somebody's typing in feverishly and they're typing, if we're getting keyboard events or something like that, what we want to say is wait till they cool down 2.5 seconds, and then notify me of the last event, right? We're not going to get the whole stream of typing that they did. We're just going to be notified of the last notification in that example. Okay, so if we run this, or excuse me, if we just to kind of wrap it out here, once again, I've got my observe on my user interface thread. I say when I get notified of this, I want to handle it on my user interface thread. And then for my subscription, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to update a label on the user interface. Okay, so let me just run the example here. Hopefully we'll have more luck than we did last time. We'll be off to a better start. All right, so the Reactive Extensions gives us the ability to do something like this, right? Subscribe. Oh, excuse me, I apologize. I said this is delayed. We're going to get all the stream of events just delayed. I got ahead of myself. Delay is going to give us our stream of events just delayed by 2.5 seconds. I got ahead of myself. Sorry about that. So as I type in here, after I type 2.5 seconds later, we're going to get those stream of updates. Okay, so if you want to build like I've seen commercials with something like this where it kind of looks like somebody's typing. Right, you can buffer out those and you can delay to process those a little bit. Okay, so it's just a simple, fluent method call inside of there to delay, and then all of those notifications that we get in this example will be delayed once again by 2.5 seconds. So kind of neat, pretty easy just to change that up here in a way that we can, like once again, delay that notification from our user interface as we update the text. But there's more, right? You sign up now, not only will you get delay, but you can also get throttle. All right, and throttle's going to look very similar here, same kind of setup. Right, we're going to have our throttle out here. Right, looks same essential setup, just a user interface. And we're going to update a label. Set up here. Maybe. So we'll wait 2.5 seconds. And then whoop. Right, we've got our throttle. So we're basically delaying this one, saying wait 2.5 seconds after the last update, and then send me all that data at once. Okay, if we were just to do this with regular events, I know that there's plenty of ways you can do it. You can set up little timers, you can do all kinds of stuff to handle it. But just by calling throttle out there, it gives us a nice, elegant way, nice, fluent way of saying, after I get all these notifications, wait out there for 2.5 seconds, and then notify me of them. All right, we've got a couple more of these. These aren't, this isn't it. Show you kind of another one here. We can also buffer out. And our buffer, let me just pull this up here. Right, buffer looks exactly the same. A lot of these helper methods here kind of all look the same in terms of their setup. But buffer, what we're going to tell it is just to buffer out 2.5 seconds. Oops. Don't want to see Xcode. It's no good. And then buffer essentially will take all of our updates for every 2.5 seconds and push it to us as one. Okay, so slightly different than our last example here. Or excuse me, buffer is going to take any updates, and every 2.5 seconds is going to push them out to us. So even if we don't have any updates or anything like that, it's going to continuously push out the last update every 2.5 seconds. We'll push out an event there, or a notification, every 2.5 seconds. So if we look down here in my args, it's going to say, here's everything that's changed. I'm going to get in this example, I'm going to get a slightly different parameter here. I'm going to get a collection of these event patterns. So in this example, it's going to give me that whole list of events that have occurred from the last 2.5 second time period. Right here, I don't have anything that's changed in the last 2.5 second time period, or I may not have it, so we're just going to do an any call on there, a link call to any, just to see if there were any updates in the last 2.5 seconds. In this case, we don't have any. Or right now, I don't have any, but if I were to type, let me go back to here again. See if I catch it fast enough. No. Let's try this again. There we go. Whoop. Right, we can see in this case, oops, there we go. My args list, I can see my changes here, my event arguments that came through. Right, so I get a stream of event arguments. Every 2.5 seconds, I'm getting anything that's changed since that last interval. So that's helpful, but this is going to continue to run whether or not I have any updates. My simulator is going to freak out. So it's going to continue to run whether or not I have any updates. You'll see it down here in my update window. Every 2.5 seconds, I'm going to get a new notification out there in my debug window. So it's good, but it's kind of doing too much work. It might be doing more work than I want it to do. So what we could do is we can modify this just a little bit here, and we could introduce our old friend link. Okay, so now in this case, what I could do is I could have that same call here to buffer, but now what I can do is introduce this link where clause, and I could say, you know what, I'm only interested in these notifications when the args list is not null and when there's actually something in the argument list. Otherwise, I don't care about it. Let them fire off, that thing is still it's still buffering out those changes. But if nothing's changed with those, sorry, in this case, buffer, if nothing has changed in that last 2.5 second time period, we don't care about them. So essentially, if nothing has changed, just throw those notifications away. Okay? We're only interested, or we only want to allow people to subscribe to these notifications if there truly was a change. So in this case, if I were to run it again, we will see maybe. There we go. We can see in this case, right, if we watch down here in the output window, I got my 2 updates. But now if I sit here and I don't actually update my text fields, if there's no events being fired off for the text changing, it's not actually going to have any notifications being pushed. Right? That where clause in there is going to prevent those notifications from being pushed, because we said we only care about these notifications when there's an argument list and when there's actually something in that argument list. Right? So we can mix link into here, and we can actually, pick and select what we want to grab out from these observations or from these notifications. It's not the only link statement we could use. If we wanted to use a select statement or something like that, we do that as well. That's going to be for a buffer. We'll just say args list. Maybe we only care about the very last one. And we can introduce something like that select statement here that will just give us the very last notification off that list of events. Right? So we had the whole big stream of maybe text changes. And by using that select statement here, we would say we only want it, or using the where statement, we could say we only want it when there are notifications. And then we can tell it to select out just the very last one. Don't give us all the other stuff. We don't care about it. We just want the very last notification. Okay? There is some built-in functionality into Reactive for this, though.
Hey, Mike, do you have to worry about the lifetime of the observable? Like you said, it's described as that, as both as that. You have to worry about observable event, or
it depends. There's actually
attached.
Yeah, so there's 2 types of observables. There's hot observables and cold observables. The ones that we have out here with a lot of our timers are hot observables. So they're basically just going to sit out there and fire in the background indefinitely. Cold observables then are going to only be running when there's somebody subscribed to it. So you do have to know the difference. I don't actually have anything on here to dive into it too much. But if you do have something like that timer-based observable that's just going to keep on pushing out there, or one of the ones that we've looked at here that's just continuously pushes, if that's doing a long calculation, or if that's doing something like pulling out to some disk or something like that where it's getting file locks potentially, you do have to be careful with it because you could have unintended consequences.
So even if you have it inside of a page, that page may or may not be disclosed, and you have to be aware of what that
Correct.
is.
Yeah, so if you do have those hanging out there, you can go in. Let's go out here. This is my next one, I think. Go back. Okay, I got one that I split apart earlier. Now, you might want to do something like that in this example here, just to null it out, right? To pull it off there. This event pattern one is going to be firing off there. But if you do have something hanging out there like that, do wrap that up so you can actually get it out there for sure. All right. Let me see here. Okay. Yes. Sorry. We do have another example out here really quick. Instead of doing, just our buffering and having to put where clauses and things like that out there, we can also use the sample call, which kind of just pulls that all together for us already. So if you were to looking to build something like a type ahead or some, if you're typing and you wanted to have it go and query for you as people were typing, sample's a really good one to use in that case because it essentially mimics what we just saw there in our last example. All right, every 2.5 seconds, it's just going to sample what's coming out of our buffer here. And so in this case, as notify us, you'll see sample only got fired off twice. I didn't have to put in a where statement or any kind of link in there to do it. It's just going to notify us when we get updates every 2.5 seconds. There's nothing that's changed since the last update. We're not going to have one of those notifications pushed out to us.
What's the difference between sample and buffer?
Buffer will continue to push out notifications every 2.5 seconds, even if there were no updates.
What's the difference between, sorry, I should say, buffer where?
Oh, I think sample probably does a where underneath the sheets, but where you have more control over it. I did in this example, pull that up here. Where's my buffer? Where? Right, the buffer with the where, I could control what we subscribe to or didn't subscribe to. The sample out there is only going to notify us when there are updates, right? So if there weren't any updates, like that's what I essentially did in my where clause here, is tell me if there's no updates, don't tell me about it. But that's what sample's job is, just if there's updates to notify you. And do it at a fixed interval. Because if it is something like type ahead, and you're trying to hit a database to fill in like a list underneath it or something like that, sample's really good for that because it's only going to fire off as they're typing in, and it's going to give you that little bit of a delay, so you're not firing and hitting off the database or some API with each and every keyboard click. All right, so that's all cool. Those are a lot of our reactive ways to buffer out things, right? To have these time-based events for when we're actually getting our notifications. Something else that's really cool that we can do with reactive as well then is we can actually merge two observables together. There's a few different ways we could do this. We're just going to look at one example here. And with merge, what we could say is if we have two observables here, and you can see I've got two buttons. I've got my button 1, my Peter Venkman, my button 2, where he stands. And what I want to do is I want to observe when these buttons are clicked. Down below then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to take my first observable, which is button 1 clicked, and I want to merge it with my second observable, which is my button 2 clicked. Okay? So in this case, what it's going to do is it's going to combine those streams. It's going to merge those streams so that any time one of those goes and gets fired off, I can be notified of it. Right? And if anybody out here is Ghostbusters fans, merging the streams is bad in Ghostbusters. We don't. I suppose it's the same, similar. Crossing merge. So we'll see here in this case, what I could do is I could take those two different observables. It's two different events being fired off from two different buttons. What I want to say in this case, Vote Slimer, who merged the streams. Didn't actually merge quite yet. Or they are merged, our subscriber there. But we can find out who the last person to pump an update was. Right, so it's two different observables, but I've got one consistent way to subscribe and to react to those observables. Right, it's kind of a silly example here, obviously. Let me pull this out here a little bit so it's easier to read. But just kind of a nice thing here. So if you do have two different streams of like data, maybe you have some data that you're pulling out of a database and some data that you're pulling out of an API, but they're notifying or they're pushing out the exact same models or the exact same objects at the end of the day, you could use this merge to take those two different data streams, put them together as one. There's some other types of merges that you could do, like a zip, which will take the two different data streams and put them together, notify you as both of those get updated, which is kind of nice if you have two different disparate data sources that you want to be notified of at the same time. So really some neat stuff here to combine those together. And then finally, for this, there's lots more, but finally just for today, you can also use async and awaits. This is kind of a neat example here. I'm just going to skip over some of the cruft here. But what I want to say in this case is that I want to create an observable. Okay, and in this observable, I want it to fire off or notify me every 250 milliseconds. Milliseconds. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to zip up another observable that's just going to give me a random range of numbers. Okay, so it's just going to give me a random range of numbers to be used. So I'm combining, once again, these two observables. Okay, so I'm going to combine them. Zip is similar to a merge. It's just it's saying take observable 1, zip it up with observable 2, and send these two out here as there are updates. Okay, so what this will allow me to do, what's kind of neat about this little bit of code here, is what this will do for me is it will send out a notification every 250 milliseconds to my user interface. Okay, so it's going to say, here is an update to the user interface every 250 milliseconds, and here is some value from my list of generated numbers. So you can see I've got just a random list of numbers out here. Okay, and then what I could do with that is I could scan for it, use a scan operator here, and it will give me these two inputs from my observables, and I could use those to multiply them together. Or excuse me, scan's going to give me my my last and my current value here. I'm doing a bad job of explaining this. If I like this stuff's way too complicated. Let me scoot back one step. Sorry, I'm excited. Run a little bit ahead here. Our zip is going to allow us to take these two data items and put them together. So zip, once again, is going to take our first observable here, which is our interval. It'll allow us to combine it with our second observable here, which is this range. Zip allows us then to also specify the data return. So in this case, I'm telling it we're going to take in our time interval and our range interval. But really, the only one I'm interested in is our range interval. And then what scan allows us to do is look at our current value and our previous value. And I'm just going to take those two values and multiply them together. Okay, so if you want to look at what your current value is that was pumped out from the notification, the previous value that was pumped out from the notification, we can take those two. In this case, I'm just going to multiply. All right, so let me stop talking about this for just 1 second here. Let's put this back up. Let's actually see what it does, and we'll talk about it in just a second. Be a little bit easier to understand visually, I believe. Okay, so I've got two observables. One that pumps out every 250 milliseconds. The other one that just gives me a random range of numbers. So here I'm going to calculate. You'll see every 250 milliseconds, it's just going to take those numbers and multiply the previous one by the current number. Okay, just keep on multiplying them together every 250 milliseconds. Okay, once again, it's just an example, maybe not the best one ever, but just takes those two numbers, multiplies them together. I converted two different streams, two disparate streams together, and then used the values to multiply.
So the range observable comes out a bunch of things all at once.
Yeah, you can see.
So like you alluded to using zip with two data sources, so say you have two queries, two calls, whatever, you could zip them together instead of both.
If you wanted the data to be joined like that, right? So you'd use zip if you wanted to have, data source 1's data zipped up with data source 2, so that as the first notification came out, you can take that first notification from each observable and put them together that way. Like in this case, yeah, I know, once again, probably not the best example ever, but I'm just using the range value. But if you wanted to do something out here, I could have made, for example, here's my T. Here. No, it's all sense. I don't know what to do. T.int, which is my interval that fired off there. And I could take T.int plus R, which is the range observable that came out there, right? If you wanted to, you could take those two items and you could group them or create a new object from it at that point in time. Like I said, I just took it, just using the range interval here. And then, like I said, scan gives us a way to combine those two, combine our current one with our previous one. So in this case, I'm just multiplying them together. So what's nice about it, remember, this is a stream of data. So as these notifications fire off, we could look back in the stream, not just whatever happened the most recently. And in some cases, if we want to go all the way back to the beginning of that stream of data, we could do that using it is going to be the replay command to go back earlier into our stream of data and get that. The key thing that I want to show off from this one, though, is that we can await for that observable to complete. Okay, so in this case, this observable is going to take a variable amount of time based on the amount of, let's see, this is going to probably take a fixed amount of time. That's going to take an amount of time based on how big or how long my range is there. And what we're going to do is we're just going to make an await call on our observable to await for that observable to complete. Okay, so it has a fixed amount of time that it's going to run based on the size of that range. So sometimes it might only run for just 2, loops there for 500 milliseconds or something like that. Sometimes it might run longer if that original range or my range was longer. Okay, so this gives me a way, once again, to await it. So you can use async and await with your observables as well. And in this case, I just await for that observable to complete. And once it completes, I update my text label. All right. There's a lot of data, a lot of new things, new concepts here. Lots of new observable-y things, all on the reactive side. I actually have more that I want to cover. So I'll open it up for questions in just a little bit. But this is kind of a quick intro, right? To kind of get your feet wet, get you thinking about it. Like, hey, if I have something in my application that notifies out mobile phones, if you have GPS, if you have people typing in your user interface, these reactive extensions are a great way to observe to them. If you're looking for more data on these, there's a couple great places to go out there. rx.codeplex.com is the actual source code, or where the source code is hosted. But the best place probably to go and to learn this is intro.rx.com, where there's a whole essential ebook out there that tells you all the ins and outs and all the stuff that there's no way on earth I'd be able to cover in a short period of time today. All right, so you're saying, Mike, it's all cool. We've got a bunch of string notification garbage. Why is this helpful to me? I'll show you why it's helpful here. It's helpful in the fact that we could wrap it up in a user interface component, or this we could wrap up those reactive extensions with this user interface component, Reactive UI here, which takes those same notification properties, things like our updates to button clicks, updates to our view models, and allows us to subscribe to them in a pretty elegant way. Right? So the idea behind Reactive UI, it's really just a way for us to build user interfaces, or help us build, I should say, our user interfaces, our MVVM user interfaces in a way that's a little bit more elegant and also more testable. Why would you want to use Reactive UI? First reason is if you want to make your user interface dumb, it's a great way to do that. So what I mean about making your user interface dumb is the actual view model of the MVVM piece. Right, you want that to be as dumb as possible. Your Android user interface, you want to avoid putting in logic in your user interface there. Your iOS user interface, you want to avoid putting it there. Where you want all of your work to be done is out in the view model, and Reactive UI gives us a nice way to separate those two things apart. It's easy to test. With the reactive extensions, we could do things like replay bits of code. We can start up observables and pass data and mock data into them. That's really lightweight, or that's really easy to pass in and actually build tests for our user interfaces without building a UI out. It's pretty lightweight and flexible. It is not, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, it is not a full framework that's ham-fisted or heavy-fisted that comes in and says, you must do it this way. It's sort of a helper library. You can follow it as much as you want, or you can not follow it as much as you like. You kind of have some options there. It's extensible. If you want to build it out further, if you want to bring it out to a new platform, it's fairly straightforward to do that. And finally, pretty much all of your UI work that you do becomes disposable. So this is, once again, more important for our mobile applications. It's important for all applications, but essentially using the reactive framework, almost everything there is going to return an iDisposable. So if you want to sweep up after yourself, if you want to make it so that you don't have any dangling memory issues or something like that, Reactive UI gives us a nice way just to clean up after ourselves as we go along the way. Got a video, but I'm going to skip it for right now. UI platforms that are supported. Pretty much every modern platform, even older ones like Windows Forms, are out there. So if you want to target any one of these platforms, there's already pre-built components for Reactive UI. Okay, some core concepts from Reactive UI. The first one are reactive objects. And these are objects that just implement that observable. So these are going to be objects that pump out notifications when things change on them. Okay, objects that notify the property changes. And then our reactive commands. You've done development for WPF. or XAML development or something like that, you're probably familiar with I commands. Reactive commands are just an implementation of I command, and they're just sort of a more beefed up version of it. It gives us ways to react to some exceptions a little bit better. It gives us ways to provide some failover and things like that. So really just conceptually the same as I command, just a little bit of a beefier version of it. Some other stuff that it comes with, it has a message bus so that if we want to do notifications around our application, we can use that message bus to notify around our application. There are reactive lists. These are lists that notify when they change. So if you insert something into the list, if you modify something in that list, we could be notified whenever those changes. There's an MRU cache, your most recently used cache. So if you're trying to cache out items for your user interface, images, things like that, we can use that cache out there. And there's much, much more. Right? We won't cover it all today. Well, what is it not? It is not an MVVM framework. It's not Xamarin Forms. It's not MVVM Cross. It's not MVVM Lite. It's essentially a helper library to make things like binding easier. It's a helper library to make our subscriptions to events easier. Okay, it's not cross-platform controls. It's not the whole thing that's got its own weird button and stuff like that. You basically just take your regular AS controls, your regular SARI controls, and you use them in Reactive UI. Okay? There are some helper things to make life easier for Android and iOS and stuff like that, but you can use it basically with any constructor.
You said it's not a. You said it's not an MVVM. You said it's not a complete MVVM.
It's not something like in comparison to, you know, when I think a lot of people think of when they hear like MVVM framework, they might think something like Xamarin Forms, which is sort of a full framework, cross-platform framework, or what's the other one? I'm trying to think. MVVM Cross I've written up there, which is like a full MVVM framework. Think of it more like an MVVM helper. And in fact, as we'll see here in the demos, I'm going to use the Reactive UI components with Xamarin Forms. You can also use the Reactive UI components with MVVM Cross. So it's a, we'll see. I'll show you how it kind of works here in a second, in a moment here. But it's sort of a booster or a helper in a lot of ways, as opposed to sort of a full-on, you must do it this way or no other way type framework. I don't know if, does that answer your question? So it's neat, because you can then pick and choose. Use it when you want to use it, or ignore it in other cases if it doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, so let's take a quick demo here and see Forms in action. Don't save that. All right, so let's say we are wanting to build our application out here. And the first thing we have to do for our application is set up a login screen. All right, the first part we would build out here is our view model. All right, so we might have something here like a view model called login. You'll see that view model login's base class is Reactive Object. So a little bit of a different object out here. Reactive Object is an object that can notify. Okay. Instead of doing iNotify change, we have sort of a nice little helper here that's a lot easier and more fun to type, I feel like, called raise instead of changed. So this comes with the Reactive UI components. So instead of having to build your iNotify change and build some method out there to fire it off, you can just use raise instead of changed to notify whenever this property is updated. The same value comes in, it won't fire it off twice. Only if there's a change in that property will it actually fire off. A neat thing about this too is we don't actually have to type in double quoted strings the name of the property. I'm just going to pass in this ref here to our, we're just going to pass this in here with our value, and it's going to know which property is firing that off. Okay, so just a real simple view model, just with an email address and with a password here, is all we're going to do for our first setup in our user interface. In our user interface then, in this case, you can see I've got in Xamarin Forms, it's just a regular content page. And then I've tacked on this interface here that says iViewForm view models login. Okay, so I'm saying it's just a regular content page, but it's going to implement this iViewForm so that Reactive UI then knows what's being updated out here in our user interface. Okay? iViewForm is going to be a set of, in this case, two methods, or two properties. Two properties that we need to implement here. One for our view model, right? Excuse me, let me just come in here. our IV4 implementation. Essentially, both of these just giving our view model, right? So we're just going to cast this out. We're going to say, essentially, whenever we set our view model, we're going to set it to be this type of login here, right? We're just going to tell it what our view model is. And then also we have our IV4 view model here, which is going to do a very similar thing. Just going to tell us for our view model and set it up. This is stub code. You'll set this up once. I'll show you how you can even avoid ever having to do this again in just a moment. But it's just sort of our 2 bits that we need to include into our view itself to get that link there. From there, once we have that interface set up, the next thing that we want to do is just set up our view model. We want to initialize our view model. So out here in my constructor, what I'm going to do is just set my view model equal to an instance of a view model object, right? That's my login object there. I didn't set up my user interface in XAML. I just did it in code just so we could see it really quick. But then one of the nice things that we get from Reactive UI is this ability to bind. Okay, so what I'll say here is take my view model's email address and bind it to the text portion of my entry control. What this is going to do is it's going to set up a 2-way binding. So anytime I update my text box in my user interface, it's going to pump that data back to my view model on the background. If I update my view model in the background, it will pump it back out to my user interface using this bind command. It'll pump it back out to my entry out here. There's other types of binding. And we've got things like our 1-way binding. So if we wanted something to just go from one property into the other one, we can pump it out that way, right? So we can push out those items there. So anytime, we just wanted to have the background update, just to have a label or something like that update on the user interface, we can do it that way. Right, but it gives us a really nice way, in this example, just to set up our user interface and update that view model whenever we type into it. Okay. The other cool thing about these bindings, let's see if I just hover over it and get it. It's pretty hard to tell. Is that they're iDisposable. So if we set up that binding and then we scoot off of our page or something like that, we could dispose of that binding and just free up resources. Or we could have, if we have something, and I'll show you here, if we have like eventing and stuff like that that's going on, we can unsubscribe from those events in a nice, easily disposable way. So kind of a nice little feature there for our user interfaces. I'm going to skip over the demo here for this one really quick and just get to the next one in the interest of time, just so we can cover everything. But our next demo allows us to do something just a little bit more in depth. So we're going to have our similar style login here. It's our view model for our login. But in this case, we're also going to implement a command. Okay, so a command, in this case, is going to be our reactive command. We're going to call it perform login. All of our reactive commands need to return a type. If you essentially want to return void, you can't return a void, so they have this thing called unit, which is the essential, which is the equivalent to a void in the reactive landscape. Okay, but what we could do here with our command then is we could say whenever this command gets fired off, what we want to do is return out a unit, and inside of there we want to run this code. Okay, so this would be a simulation for doing something like calling a web service or whatnot here. We're just going to have a real simple call out here. We're just going to delay. We're not going to actually do anything. We're going to wait 2.5 seconds. But we could simulate calling a web service. What you might also notice in here too is that I'm doing things like updating the property for isLoading. So that isLoading property is another one of our notifiable properties here from our view model. So if I set that to isTrue out here in the background, we could respond to that in our user interface. Okay, so let's just take a look really quick here. I'm just going to run this example just so you get an idea. Okay, you can see we've got our user interface here. I could type in my mail. type in my password. Right? One of the things you might notice is that that login goes from disabled to enabled. That's all being handled back in our view model here. Right? So if we look at this here, our Reactive UI comes with this real super handy method called whenAnyValue, which says anytime one of these values changes, right? So we have an update to our email or our password, we want to be notified of when those values change. And so in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to say, when we get an email address update or a password update, we're going to run the email against this regex. We're going to make sure that our password has a length greater than 5. And if that's true, then we're going to update this property of is valid. Okay? So we can do all of this work out here for verifying that our email and password is valid. Do our work then. Our work here to call our fake web service. Right, so let me just get a password in here. Get our call our fake web service. Oh, no, I loaded up for the wrong example. Sorry. Go just ahead one further. Go ahead two further. Second, and run. But it gives me the ability, once again, to do something like this. Click on it. It's calling my web service, my fake web service, and it's going to notify me when that web service is complete. In my user interface, then, what's cool about this is my user interface can remain fairly dumb. So like I mentioned before, what we want to do is we want to make dumb interfaces. So if we come back to our user interface for this page, you can see we have the same setup here for our view model. You know, we're actually setting up our user interface in code. You might want to use XAML or something like that. But then the rest of our user interface is essentially bindings. So we're going to say, you know, whenever these properties change out here, just respond to those changes. Okay, it's just a nice way to respond to those changes. Additionally, we could say that if there's something that, like an event that fires off, like in this case, when somebody clicks on our user interface, we want to execute some command. Okay, depending on our different user interface paradigm, it might be a button click, it might be an image click, it might be a who knows what. Just give us a nice, easy way to say, in this case, whenever somebody clicks on our login button, try to perform our login command there. What's neat, too, is we can also observe when those commands complete. So in this case, if my command completes here, right, I can listen for when that login command completed. If it was successful or unsuccessful, we may have returned a Boolean value, something like that. We could use that and subscribe to those commands as well. Right, so it just gives us a nice, easy way to subscribe to those commands. Now, once again, you know, a lot of this code, you know, it's pretty simplistic code, but if we wanted to, you know, we could introduce, you know, link queries and stuff like that into here to respond to our different user interface calls, respond to our different updates and things like that. I'll just show you one last quick demo here, what you could do fairly easily. Put this together just on the train ride here today. So hopefully it works. Might blow up. But in the couple of minutes that I had on the train ride in, or more than a couple of minutes, if you want to look at it, I was able to build something like a real simple color slider here that's fully reactive. It's kind of a neat user interface if it gets up. It runs. Right, but essentially every time I move these sliders on my user interface here, it's just going to notify me of my value for red, green, and blue and update it on the UI. Okay. The UI, the actual user interface implementation, once again, is pretty dumb. All we do is we create our controls over here. We bind our controls, right? So we say for our view model, we have a simple view model that has a red, green, and a blue property in them. We're just going to take the value from our red, green, and blue sliders on the user interface. And then we're going to say anytime in my view model that I have an update to my color, go and update the user interface and update the background color for that box on the screen. Okay? So if I want to take this, then this is in Xamarin Forms, but if I wanted to take all this code and bring it out to Android, native Android or native iOS, I could use these same bind calls, I could use that same entity value calls to bring it out to that framework that doesn't have great built-in MVVM support, right? Android, iOS are really built for MVC, but you could use these, the Reactive UI, to make it more MVVM-like and make it more similar to what we might be used to developing with in Xamarin, right? Or what we might be more familiar with developing out on the Microsoft stack. Okay, so really cool. I know we're a little bit over time here, I believe. But really cool stuff. Really neat framework. Like I said, we're not going to be able to go super deep into everything today, but really interesting with what you could do with this. Really simple for setting up our user interfaces, right? You don't have to set up a bunch of event handlers. You don't have to set up a bunch of setup code or anything like that. Just allow bind, in this example for Reactive UI, to do the heavy lifting for us. We want to be notified whenever anything happens in our view model. We've got a nice, easy way to do that. And we can also do things like I mentioned before that ensure that whenever we get these notifications that they run on our UI thread. So in here with our observe on, we could say whenever this fires off, always be on the UI thread when we get this notification, so we don't have to worry about trying to update it from a background thread or anything like that. Also, once again, super helpful for our user interface applications. All right, so if you're interested in finding out more information on Reactive UI, recommend taking a look at reactiveui.net. That's the website. It's the grand place to go find out that information. Otherwise, jump out on their GitHub. It's primarily maintained by a fellow named Paul Betts. He does a great job. He used to work over at GitHub and now works over at Slack and uses a lot of this tooling on those applications. So best place to go and find it out. Lots of examples, demos, and stuff like that out there as well out on the GitHub site. Right, so with that, that was my, as fast as I could go, overview of these very complex topics. So I apologize, but I'd like to open it up for any questions or comments. All of today's demos as well are out on our GitHub site, so if you want to jump out there, it's github.com/the8bot. You go find it, and it's our reactive examples. If you want to see any of the code that we ran here today. And if you want to get a hold of me, I'm at Stonis, or Michael Stonis. And if you want to get a hold of our company, we're at the 8bot. That's everything. Thank you. All right.
Did you just go nuts and refactor everything?
What's that?
Did you take an existing application and just go in and refactor it all with this, or what would be, like, if you have an application, what would be something to look at? Like, how would you go about maybe factoring an application?
Sure. I mean, one of the first great places to go, like when we first started using this on our applications, the first thing I did is I went and found all of our event handlers and replaced them, with the from event pattern. I don't think I have it. I had it on this. Let's see if I've got one. With our from event pattern here calls, this gives us a nice way to subscribe and dispose of those. So what you could do then, for an example here, is a lot of times in mobile applications, you'll have a button click handler that brings you from one page to the other. But when you go to that other page, or if you go like 5 or 6 or 7 pages deep, if you have event handlers that never were unsubscribed from, they're going to be sitting out there keeping those old pages in memory, and you might not want that. Using this way of subscribing to those, right, is just going to keep those around as they're needed, or we can dispose of them later on. So that as your application goes through its life cycle, if it goes into pause or into the background, we can just dispose of all those observables and then just rehydrate them once we get set back up. So just kind of a nice, clean, easy way for getting that set up in that example. But a lot of our stuff that we did, that was kind of our first point that we went through, are a lot of those eventing operations. But then from there, if you have view models, even if you're using traditional XAML development today, and you've got your I commands and your I notify property change, you can literally just go in and update your, this is my view model. You could update your view model, just make sure it's a reactive object, and just replace your I notify property with raise and set change, and it will continue to work exactly like it does today. So, it's compatible with what you were doing previously, right? Your reactive commands will still work with your other subscriptions in XAML that were set up as I commands. So if you want to replace them, you can just take them, replace it quick. We had an example of Nathan over here had an app that he wrote that was all I commands and, standard XAML, I'll call it, type stuff, and I replaced it, ripped it out, and put in the Reactive UI stuff in a night. So pretty easy, straightforward. Yeah, go ahead.
Did this change anything that with like background services and things like that? Did you maybe morph some of those into just kind of like a application-based observable kind of thing, or?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, like a lot of our calls, let me see if this one, things like calling out to a web service. Previously, I might have had a button-click handler inside of my, my view, for example, and I would have said, go to this repository or go to this web service API, call out to it, and await out there. Okay, so then now I've got my repository out in my view, or I've got my backend code exposed in my view, or something like that. In this case, then, what I could do is just replace it here with these commands and wrap all that code inside that command. So I've removed any calls to repositories from, this is more on the Android or iOS side where we don't have the nice stuff that we have in the Windows world. But, I can remove any of that, really like back-end style logic from my view itself and put it all into this command. So that same work I would have been doing before, for calling a web service now is all handled in my view model and is nice and wrapped up. So in particular, like I mentioned a few times here, this is good for platforms where MVVM might not have been available, WinForms, Xamarin Android, Xamarin iOS, or even if you're building applications on multiple platforms, like I said, you could use it in harmony with the pre-existing stuff, but add those features out to the platforms if they didn't have it. So kind of nice. Like in this example too, gives us an easy way to set things like loading flags. So if I set that loading property to true, I'll show a little spinner on my user interface, or hide it. I can probably run. Example again here really quick. Right, but I can encapsulate all of that logic into my view model so that my view itself is as dumb as it can be, right? All I do is set up my bindings, maybe set up some observables so that I can be notified when commands complete and things like that. But my view itself has no idea about what API it's calling, what database it's calling, what type of logging is being done, or anything like that. And it's essentially just there to accept input and give output for the most part. So, like I said here, I've got you'll see as I click login in my view model, I update it to say is loading. Right, so as I set that is loading in the view model, I could respond to it in my UI. So it removes a lot, especially for when we're doing Android or iOS, removes a lot of that spaghetti code that we might have had inside the view itself, just because it was difficult to keep up with. Yep.
What if any is the relationship between Reactive Extensions observables and observable collection already?
It's the Reactive UI stuff's just built on all of that observable collections and whatnot. So you can still use those, like there's the Reactive list, which is sort of, once again, just like a beefed up observable collection. So a lot of it's just sort of what was already out of the box with the Reactive extensions, just beefed up or built up more so that you could use it a little bit cleaner on the user interface. So like I said, for like iCommands probably not the best example, but for observable collections, if you just want to be notified of when one of your properties inside of your collection gets modified, it's really easy to set that up here with the Reactive list. Just be notified when that one item is updated. There's lots of little helpers like that to make our lives as developers easier. Any other questions, comments? Like, is there more beer and pizza? I think there is. So, all right, that's everything I have. Thank you everybody for joining us here.